Sure. Yeah.
All right, I guess I'll call the meeting to order.
Yeah, this is a little informal because PBOT's not calling this SAC meeting. This is an opportunity for us as a group and the public to offer commentary and so forth with the notion that we've got Erica Neville from PBOT on the call. This is a listening session for them, as we move forward. So so thank you for coming, and it's also just FYI, kind of good to know that we can do this.
Yeah.
Let's just go around the room and introduce ourselves. My name is Todd Zarnitz, board member of the SAC for the Business Association.
And I'm Amy Spreadborough. I'm the current chair of the SAC and representing the Northwest Business Association.
And I'm Brett Hornart. I'm a member at large.
Steve Finger, NWDA.
Northwest Business Association and SAC, I guess.
Yeah.
Jay Terman.
Yay.
Tom Ranieri, and I'm at Cinema 21, former SAC member.
Karen Carlson,
Karen.
former SAC member, resident and business owner in Northwest.
Rick Michelson, retired SAC member.
And former chair.
Let's go through on the hybrid portion. Joseph.
Roselle Johnson, member of the SAC and representing NWBA, the Business Association, and a neighbor.
Jean.
Jean Harrison.
Got Erica, who may or may not be able to speak.
Hey, hi, Erica Nemioga-Nebel, Parking Operations Division Manager. Thanks for letting me be here, inviting me. Thank you.
And Llewellyn.
Llewellyn Robeson, Northwest resident.
All right. Yeah, so we have sort of a loose agenda here, do a couple of updates perhaps, and then kind of get into discussion items. As you may all know, the Northwest Parking SAC right now is on a pause or a hiatus. In September, PBOT came to not only our parking SAC, but others as well, requesting a pause, and in part because of budget constriction on their part, a $32 million budget shortfall, which makes them have to kind of look at their staff resources and see how they serve groups like ours, and ours included in the city. And then also, I think it came pretty clearly in part because there's a sense that there have been some disconnects or things that haven't been working really well in the process. So an opportunity to kind of think about how to do that, do things better going forward. The expectation is that we'll go back to our monthly SAC meetings starting with the April 17th meeting. Right now, we haven't worked on an agenda for that per se. And I know there's stuff going on at PBOT to kind of like tighten down how meetings and what the annual calendar and so forth might look. And I've had the opportunity to sit in on a couple or three kind of team meetings to look at those things. It's still kind of high level and not finalized, so I'm not sure how much I could share, but I'll try to share what I can. And and then mostly an opportunity just to kind of give PBOT an opportunity to hear ideas from us, from our experience with the committee, or even as newcomer, Brett's our newest SAC member here, about how we can move forward. And anything to add?
Yeah, I'll just add that I think this is an important meeting because it's one that we've scheduled ourselves, which I don't know how long has it ever been done, or so I think it's an important step because part of the thing about the pause is like in our bylaws, it says we're supposed to meet 12 times a year. That didn't happen last year. And then, but whose fault is that? And who are we as a group? You know, does PBOT control the group? Not really. It's a group created by city council ordinance, and the group is sort of in charge of itself, you know? And so if PBOT says, you know, we're not gonna have meetings, that's not really their say to make. I mean, they can not support the meetings, I guess, even though they're required to in the bylaws. But I think at least I got kind of caught up in this idea that PBOT was sort of out of their depth by pausing us. And then I guess I was trying to figure out like, well, where do we go from here? I mean, are they violating, you know, the agreement, you know, or are they violating kind of the ordinance from city council, or, you know, and so we kind of went down that path a little bit, but I think that the stronger argument is we ourselves are the body. We can call a meeting ourselves, and you know, we're not, PBOT plays an important role in, of course, the group, but it doesn't control the group, and I think that is sort of lost on the group at large in a way, just because we just feel like, because PBOT just seems to be controlling everything as far as like the agenda, the tempo, our ability to give them feedback in a way. And so, you know, I'd like to see us sort of go around the room and, you know, maybe pepper the group with ideas of how we can better be a group, I guess, and better serve the neighborhood and by extension PBOT and, you know, what they're doing to deal with the neighborhood. And so I think it's a great meeting. I don't know what's going to become of it, but I think this is an important step.
Yeah, so one thing I can say is I've had the good fortune to talk with a number of you, you know, during the hiatus and get input, and have had the opportunity to sit down with our PBOT team and talk about like how do we make good constructive meetings. Like and I just want to reiterate some of the most important feedback that I've gotten so far and have relayed is that our meetings, you know, they have felt like there wasn't really opportunity for adequate talk, discussion, questions, and so forth. I kind of heard complaints about lots of PowerPoint and kind of a limitation on discussion and kind of rushing to votes. And so I've given that feedback. One of the most important things that we can do as a group is have the opportunity to discuss, agree, disagree, you know, become informed and offer our guidance to PBOT. And if that's too truncated into a 5-minute discussion here or 10 minutes here, we don't get a sense that we've been adequately heard. Anyway, I'm just going to start with things, and if we want to go around the table, because I know you've all got additional stuff.
I'd like to just pause, if I could, on what you just said about the, you know, the kind of amount of discussion and deliberation, because I think that was a kind of widely held view. But I don't go back far enough to understand if that's always been the case. But I guess I'd like to just kind of poll you guys informally as to whether that was a feeling, you know, 5 years ago.
It may be a sense of what's changed over the years,
Yeah,
you know.
because I fully agree. I mean, it just seemed like the agendas have got so delineated, and it was, you know, kind of driving to a foregone conclusion as to what the outcomes of any given meeting would be, and the deliberation and discussion just seemed like it continued to decrease. But
Well, at the beginning, and of course, you know, chime in, but at the beginning, it was all about discussion, and it was free ranging. There were agendas, but it wasn't, and we were figuring things out as well. But I sensed the change beginning somewhere around 2016. And then tragically, with COVID, we went into the Zoom format, which made it almost impossible to have meaningful discussion from my perspective anyway. But prior to that, there was this slow erosion of what our aims were. And I believe it became a slow transference over to what PBOT's overarching goals were in their plans that they created for, 10 or 15 or 20 years. And essentially, we were left behind. And with the onset of COVID, it just became basically a straitjacket. We could not have discussion that people could, freely, express, what they were thinking and gauge, what people were thinking in the room, and it was just a totally different thing. I think from the standpoint of PBOT, this is just my opinion, it was really quite, a good thing to have Zoom, because it really stifled, for a number of reasons, meaningful discussion, and it helped to, grease the skids for the direction they wanted to go in. And I think in a large part, I mean, I spent, I don't know how many times in meetings complaining about the format and why we didn't go back to, in-person meetings. And there was always a reason or another why we couldn't do that. But by the end of it, we basically got to that place where we all fell off the cliff together, So that's my opinion. Does that sound?
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, it really was, there was no example, right? There was nothing that said, what does a group like this do? And we spent a lot of time gathering information and figuring out how a parking program would work and what was efficient and what wasn't, and, a lot of stuff. And there was tons of discussion. I think that once that got settled a bit, the attention was drawn to the fact that we had money.
Mhm.
And now it was, what do we do with the money? And so we were having all kinds of discussions, and some of us felt like we were just hoarding money, and we needed to actually spend money so that people would see that things were happening. And so I think two things then started sort of automatically, is that the city took on a program that said, we'll figure out what the neighborhood needs in transportation. And they guided that. So by guiding that, they guided it through their, their lens, what they PBOT wanted to do. And of course, there was feedback and such, but when it's structured in a certain way, I think that the neighborhood involvement and the SAC involvement just didn't quite have the same feel. And then secondly, a broader thing is that the city decided it needed to structure all of us, all of the advisory groups, and we were the weird one out there. And so they started wanting to put us back into a, like we're the bicycle advisory group, or we're the whatever advisory group. So bylaws were being changed, and so-and-so was dictating how this happened. And so it became this different kind of structure.
Well, and I think the mood changed when we were told by PBOT that we could not speak to the press.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
What was that around?
we could not speak to the press.
What was the circumstance?
That's part of their bylaws and part of the city trying to gain control of their message. And it's not just PBOT, that's the city.
Right.
But we all came here with independent constituencies and independent history with the press. And to be told we couldn't speak to the press without getting the okay from somebody at City Hall really spoiled the mood. I'll make a couple of other comments. One is, instead of being the center of involvement about parking issues for PBOT, as you were saying, we are just one of many input points, instead of being the main one for the district. And I think two facts reveal that very clearly. One is the number one priority for the district, since I've been involved in this, in terms of pedestrian improvements, was the intersection at 21st and Gleason. Well, nothing has ever happened about that over 10 years because it needs to fit into their programs and not the neighborhood program. But the one that's more crucial is we have no influence on parking patrol. All of these programs have been based on good enforcement, good information, and we don't even have a say about how many parking patrol people are assigned to the district. That's decided someplace else on different criteria.
Despite that we have the money.
So that sort of really hurts that enforcement piece. We know that we've got hundreds of construction workers parking on our streets every day, never getting a ticket. Well, it's because the city has other priorities for enforcement. Sometimes they're some other neighborhood with a problem, sometimes it's homeless, sometimes it's something else, but we don't have control of the mechanisms we need. Similarly with the consulting contracts. You know, we can request a consulting contract, but we still have to go through PBOT process. It takes 1.5 years. But the conclusion I've come to in all of this is our mission is too big. We can't do it all. We can't do it all effectively without having 3 meetings a month and lots of discussions that none of us have the time for.
Right.
And I think you really need to decide what are the aspects of the SAC mission that are unique to the SAC, that aren't that don't have other citizen involvement processes, that don't have other places to go and concentrate on them. For instance, Nob Hill and NWDA are totally capable of dealing with plans for the pedestrian realm and the street lighting programs.
Right.
You know, we were just an extra discussion place that in fact got in the way of it. You know, I could see a SAC saying that our role in terms of budgeting is just saying, these are the piles we would like to put the money in. Nob Hill, NWDA, planning committees, you advise the city on which projects that money should be spent on. Because I think that's more than enough work to do concentrating on parking. You know, are the programs that we established working? Are there better programs that we could do to encourage employees to leave their cars at home? Are there better ways of enforcing things? You know, we get these big, very expensive reports each year, but with everything else that's going on, there's no time to really discuss them and come to conclusions about changes. We're always driven by the process, and it's always too late. So I would try to focus on those things. I would, you know, potentially suggest that, given the budget constraints, maybe those reports should only be done every other year. As a big general report. And then in alternate years, have them concentrate on one aspect or one sub-district for a much smaller study. That would give you more time to evaluate it and pay attention to the reports that are written. And give staff relief from the constant work of trying to keep up with this treadmill of, you know, report deadline now, then this, and this, and this, and this, and this.
Yeah, because
So reducing your scope to the things that really only you have a role in, I think would be helpful.
Anybody else in the room want to speak, and then we'll go through online?
I just, you know, I think a lot of people have said what I agree with. I mean, I've just barely been on this thing probably a little over a year. And, you know, one thing that was frustrating was getting the agenda for the meeting maybe a day or two ahead of time. The studies that were supporting the agenda were not clear. Zoom, along with Thompson, is a huge problem. You just cannot have effective meetings with this many members. Zoom works with 1, 2, or 3 people. Or 2, obviously not 1.
Oh, it can.
One plus one.
Talk to yourself.
Depending on how many people is there.
You know, everything seems, you know, as far as the way that the PBOT is kind of like directing meeting, it's the conclusion that we know what they want and they want us to vote that way. You know, the debates, we just don't have enough information to properly debate the questions put before us. And when we do try to dig in a little bit, they get frustrated. They, you know, like, hey, wait, you know, it's like we're putting their feet to the fire. Well, that's our job. You know, going back to what you said about parking, you know, parking is a huge deal here in Northwest. It's not addressed. You know, they do things all the time to eliminate parking. They don't study that. They don't study how it affects business. Oh yeah, we're at capacity, whatever. Doesn't mean anything. Yeah, we have to do a study to add off-street parking, and we can't get to that for a couple of years, and we haven't been getting into it for the last 12 years. But we can continue to eliminate on-street parking with no study and no understanding of the effects, especially with all the additional residents in the area. And, you know, it just doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. I don't really understand the enforcement issue at all. I mean, we were in here, we heard somebody from, you know, worked for the enforcement division. They said it takes $175,000 to get one online for a person, double what we pay the Secretary of State. It doesn't make any sense to me. Okay? I think we can get people on. I think they'd probably be a revenue generator, especially in Northwest. You know, what's a ticket now? $64 or something like that? It's expensive. And, you know, we want to cycle people through this neighborhood. It helps our businesses. You know, let's get people in here. You know, and, you know, parking is a big deal, but, you know, again, I think PBOT has their head in the clouds. They're focused on, you know, the state of Oregon says we want to reduce, you know, emissions by 50%, but there's no way for us to make sense of that at our level. And just by eliminating parking, doesn't really, there's no connection to those two problems whatsoever. I mean, I think, you know, right now, the last 5 years, we need to focus on graffiti, garbage, and crime. That's what's gonna help the businesses in our area. It's gonna help the neighborhood. It's gonna, you know, that's what's gonna make people feel good about living in Portland. Probably there are other issues too. Obviously, the drug and homelessness, but I think they're trying to address that. But I don't hear enough people talking about those other issues.
Brett, do you want to say anything before we cycle through that?
Sure, I mean, I'll just say that I'm mainly here to learn because I've only been to 3 meetings and this is brand new to me. But I guess, you know, I have been struggling kind of, I don't exactly know what we do. I think to your point, you know, that's partially due to my ignorance being involved in stakeholder committees, but yeah, I'll just say I'm mainly here to just learn.
Let's cycle through online. Tuesday, anything?
Got a couple of new people.
Yeah, we'll go.
Oh, is it me or somebody in the room?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, first off, if you're in the room, turn off your mic because we're getting online, we're getting a little bit of echo. And so that's just somebody not turning off their laptop because the owl will pick up the information. So a couple things. I don't have a history with SAC before I came on about 1.5 years ago, and check me if I'm wrong. I think one of the things coming out, retiring from a commercial role, the lack of information, the lack of data. And I can specifically remember a PBOT presentation where they were changing roles and changing processes. And I personally asked for, where's the data on this? What's the run rate in terms of traffic and other places? And was told, well, that's not available yet. And the next thing I said, well, can we wait for this? And the response by the PBOT person was, well, it's all in the calendar. We need to do it now. And that just really exemplified the mismatch of what we're doing here. We need data to make decisions. I want PBOT to have data to make decisions. And the fact that data is not being used was very frustrating to me because I think that would help us understand both sides of the shop, what PBOT's trying to do, what we want to do. And not having that information and having the comment pretty much of, trust me, it's coming and that's what it'll be, did not build trust. And that's one of the specific answers. And I actually have the detail of who did that and about what time, but that was the exact words, and it just really frustrated me. So that's my main one.
Let's go to.
I have one more. The other thing, let's talk about neighborhood beautification and the fact of how wonderful the neighbors think this is going to be. Well, as one of the people that corner got beautified without telling me, without having any input, and also stole 2 parking places, it pissed me off. At least having information that is available to the public, maybe a notification of neighbors that are directly involved by PBOT, is important. This is an example of where we get frustrated as neighbors. So I bring that up. Thanks, that's it.
Was that a painted curb extension?
It was a painted curb extension, and it was protecting a right-hand turn on a left one-way. So there was no way to protect the right-hand turn. So I must admit, I went to the mountain and I got a parking place back, but it again, lack of data, lack of interaction with who was actually being affected by the actions that were going on. I have a very faded painted curb cordon now. It's very difficult to clean up because I'm the low point in the block. It gets water. I mean, it's basically faded because of all the water. There's nothing wrong or right. It's just not the right place for it.
Let's go to Jean. Jean, you got anything?
I pass.
Let's go to Greg, who is a newcomer.
I think you're on mute.
You're on mute.
Yeah, I haven't started talking yet, but I'm not on mute. Hey, I think most of you have spoken for issues that I foresee or that I see. So I think and even Joselle just kind of reminded me of what's at the core of the challenge I face serving on this committee. And I just don't trust PBOT. I don't trust them to implement projects in a thoughtful way, in a thorough way. And when I'm at this point, when I'm asked to approve almost anything through the work that we do as a committee, there's a big part of me that just feels like I don't want to give them any money to do anything because they don't seem to be able to do anything right. And everything else y'all have said is really important to me, but just because of what Giselle said, she reminded me of the fact that in sitting through the SAC meetings, I just end up in this place over and over again. And I think most of you have raised issues that feed into where that distrust comes from. So that's all I've got to say today. And Steve, thank you for reminding me. I was here at 4:30, you guys, and I was like, where is everybody?
Oh, right.
Let's go to Llewellyn.
I'm not a member. I'm just somebody interested who happens to own a car and drive it. And I have to agree with Greg. I don't trust PBOT. In my neighborhood, they decided one day that, gosh, there are zillions of bicyclists here, so we have to create separate lanes for them to go against the truck about it. And as a result, they've put up their little stanchions, which are continually knocked over by trucks trying to maneuver the corners. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever.
New member, Lucas K. Do you want to introduce yourself and do you have any comments for the group?
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Just wanted to say thanks for having me on. I got the email, so this is my first meeting. Eager to be a part and learn more. I was really excited when Oregon threw parking minimums out the window a couple years ago. Now that we no longer require parking lots for buildings. Honestly, I think that's going to be a game changer. But I mean, if we're really only talking about on-street parking, I have a car. I never drive it. I walk everywhere. I am a big proponent for bioswales and like the greenery, but I think I'm just gonna keep my mouth shut and be a good observer for now because this is my first meeting.
Great, well, thanks for coming, appreciate it. And moving forward, if anybody online wants to say anything, just put your hand up and then we'll get to you. It's a little tough to tell if you want to chime in. Back to you.
Let's see where we're at, the time wise, 6:35. We can move into talking a little bit about goals for parking for the neighborhood. I'm really intrigued, Rick, by what you were talking about in terms of maybe the SAC doesn't juggle all these balls because it is too many meetings. I think it was something like, I heard something like 30 meetings over the last year between subcommittees and our regular meetings. So, you know, and that's hard. We're all volunteers and members of the public. And so, you know, what makes sense to focus on? And, you know, and then where do some other things that might be passions, but not perhaps the core business of this committee or what PBOT's interested in right now? Where can we go with those things?
Yeah, I thought that establishing the subcommittees would make the work easier for the committee, but it really didn't
It
work.
doesn't.
Partially because of the committee structure of everybody wanting to participate at the full committee level and have the whole discussion over again.
Yep.
You know, we never got to the point of trust where a recommendation would come from a subcommittee and it would almost automatically be adopted by the full committee. So that didn't work.
Right.
But I think some of the things that were discussed at those subcommittees really, I don't know quite how to say this, really are too big for the SAC to deal with or need to be dealt with someplace else. And maybe going through your mission and saying, these are the three things that are most important that we gotta do. You know, we gotta make sure that the parking is working and that we do everything we can to make it work. We've got to make sure that alternative transportation modes are supported and that the outreach is done to reduce the demand for parking. We've got to recognize that reducing the use of cars doesn't get rid of the cars. It just means they take the parking spaces more.
Yeah.
And there's some things that we started to follow through on a while ago and ask for review and study. One was that after the bicycle improvements went in, we were really supposed to get a study of what was happening, not just the annual count and the normal thing. My sense of it is we have more bicyclists bicycling in the neighborhood, but they're not using the bike streets. They're going wherever they want to go because it's convenient and it's safe and we're not out in some place where we have high traffic speeds. So maybe some of the bike paths could be put back to autos or put back to parking. The other one that was a study that we were just starting when I timed out was really looking at the wallets and seeing not how many wallets are giving out, but how they're changing transportation. When you look at the number of wallets that are given out and the few cars that we've gotten rid of because of the wallets, maybe there's a better way to spend that money. You know, maybe part of the permit fee for everybody ought to be a mini transportation wallet. You know, when you get your parking pass, you know, we don't want you driving as much. We'll give you $50 worth of TriMet hop share or a bike pass or something else as part of this package. You know, my long-term goal was to make it so that people didn't feel a need to own cars in the neighborhood. And doing it punitively, I don't think works.
Well, I was always quite fixated on, was the money we were spending, for transportation demand management, so the wallet and other such things, was it effective? Because what we were supposed to be doing is managing parking. And by managing parking, one of the things we were supposed to do is get people out of their cars, but more than that, get them to not own a car. And so all the money that we're spending on transportation wallets or whatever, were they actually accomplishing the goal we want? So we should have some metrics. We should know what it's doing. And I felt that it wasn't doing what we had wanted it to do, and that it was being dishonest to say, we're doing this to do that, to get people out of their cars. It's like, no, I think we're doing this because we think it's a good thing to give away these passes for people to use transit. But I would guess that 90% of the people who had passes already did use transit. And it was great. It was a reward for them. That's wonderful. Let's admit it. One of the things I always wanted to understand was what got people out of their cars. Because again, I concentrate this thing on, we're trying to manage parking. And if we want people to give up their cars, what will make them give up their cars? A transportation wallet is not making people give up their cars. Because I think Rick pointed out, and frankly, I think Lucas is an example. People love this neighborhood. They'll walk places, they'll take a bus, they'll take streetcar, but they still own a car.
Yeah.
And that car takes up a space on the street. And therefore, it doesn't open up that parking space for people to come and go. So.
Well, and I think we also read it's politics, and it's politics around the state. For the same reason the tolling isn't moving forward. Programs that staff and some of us thought should happen aren't moving forward. It just takes too much political heat to raise the price of the parking permits to a point where it's gonna have an impact. You know, the original assumption was we would step the pricing up until we got to the point where it was making a difference in people's behavior, i.e. they were moving to a different neighborhood where they didn't have to have a parking permit if they had a car.
Well, or they would go, enough, right? I mean, that would be the other.
Or they just would be a
reaction.
neighbor.
And
So it was
Maybe
it was an incorrect assumption on all our parts that would work. Another similar one is the, what do they call it? The adjustable rate parking meters, the demand management, that raise the fee a dime or 50 cents.
Yeah.
You know, that doesn't work unless you can raise the fee $2 an hour. Because,
And to your point earlier, you know, a lot of these programs don't work without enforcement, you know, and you can make it as complicated as you want, but if nobody's getting a ticket for hanging out all day, people are just gonna be hanging out all day, which, you know, I think, you know, enforcement is a big, you know,
Big key,
big key to any program being.
and I don't think we could ever enforce strictly enough to get construction workers to not park here. They need to work here. But we could at least get the revenue that they're supposed to be paying.
Right.
And do something else.
I think I'll just volunteer real quickly, like a goal for the neighborhood, or maybe this year is that we were able to open up, access to the legacy parking garages on evenings and weekends, $1 an hour, $5 max. But nobody knows about it. They're just big, huge, empty garages. And I know that's sort of like you know, it's just, it kind of goes against this idea of, we need less cars and we hate cars and whatever that attitude is, but you know, we have struggling businesses here. That need people to come stash their car in the garage and walk around the neighborhood and spend their money. That benefits the residents of the neighborhood because then we have, you know, healthier businesses that are cooler and doing, you know, more fun things, I guess, in a way, and strengthens, you know, the neighborhood as a whole. And then, you know, potentially helps alleviate some of the on-street parking congestion, because if you can pay less money to park in a garage and you don't have to worry about a ticket and you can be there all day for $5, why wouldn't you do that? The reason nobody does it is because nobody knows about it. And this is like something that the SAC has money to promote, you know, and you know, put up a sign on the street, or you know, put paper cars that are parking on the street with a notice that, hey, if you come back to the neighborhood, try, you know, you can park in any one of these garages evenings and weekends from this time for, you know, $1. And I think moving forward with the, you know, the concerts that are coming to Providence Park, we're gonna have a whole mess of people coming to the neighborhood that, you know, don't know what they're doing and are just gonna drive down here with the assumption that they can figure it out, which might not be the case. You know, there's, you know, there's this sort of ideology, it's like, well, those people just need to take public transportation, and that's fine, we can encourage that. But, you know, by just pretending we don't have resources to, you know, soak up some of these cars is just kind of detrimental to the neighborhood and you know, our livability here, you know, I think a lot of it is like this, there's a lot of ideology getting away of like functioning place in a way, and we need a balance. We need to, like, you know, acknowledge the ideology and our, you know, how we want our future to look down the road, but also have to deal with our present circumstances at the moment.
Yeah, I think we also presumed that the Northwest Party SAC staff person would spend half their time in the neighborhood. You know, would go out and promote these programs, would meet with the businesses, develop information for the next program. Really get their eyes on the beat, you know, the street, walk around and see all the parking spaces that could be added back if somebody pushed a little bit, and really help that happen. Well, partially, I think we've made that role so bureaucratic that there isn't enough time to do the real work. The real work is working with people in the neighborhood. You know, the amount of time that Rayleigh had to spend developing agendas and reports and supervising consultants and negotiating with the other PBOT stuff really took a lot of time that could have been better spent dealing with the locals.
And in a way, the liaison should be attending meetings, you know, as far as the NWDA goes, or the business meetings, to get a sense of, you know, what's stressing the neighborhood at the moment, you know?
Yeah, then maybe they wouldn't have to have as many SAC meetings. You know, if that person were really out and about, maybe the SAC meetings could be reduced to quarterly.
Well, it was my recollection, though, maybe I'm wrong, that when, you know, who was the person we hired, we thought we were. Catherine, when she was the liaison, she was around a lot, and I think
Until
that.
she wasn't.
Yes, exactly.
Until she drank the cup.
She disappeared, and we got a new person, and I believe at that point that what happened is the charge of what that person was supposed to do changed. It aligned with, you know, more concretely and interlocked with, you know, what happens in you know, the upper reaches of PBOT. And what I saw basically was an advocate for what PBOT was wanting to, you know, make happen in all the neighborhoods. That's what we were getting. And the idea that we would have a parking supply portion of our meetings just basically disappeared. It was just, you know, whenever it was brought up, it was like, oh, yes, but nothing ever happened. The origin of the SAC, what we were charged with, was one of the legs of the stool was to have an increase in parking off street. You can't increase the on-street, obviously. You can decrease the on-street, but you can't increase it. And we're supposed to find some way of getting more on off-street. And that quickly became, you know, a distant, you know, third, fourth, fifth, or sixth on the agenda, to the point where when we finally had that, I wasn't involved anymore, but when we had a meeting in which we were talking about what you know, the outcome of all the work that Rick was doing with his, you know, his organization, there was still, you know, the idea that we would look at that, the possibility of adding in 3 to 5 years. And getting back
But
to,
only 2 to 5 years if other measures were.
exactly, and to that point, I want to speak specifically, because I talked to Rick about this. I called him up and talked to him, and he said, no, you've already done these things, you don't have to wait that long. But what we got, well, not we, I was not part of it at that point, but what I saw in the meeting was essentially that somebody at PBOT, who no longer works there, insisted that the language in that report from Rick's organization say that all of these other aspects of how to deal with parking in Northwest had to be satisfied first before any additional off-street could be considered. Now, how would you even know whether or not you've gotten to the end of the other, ways of doing things? You cannot know that. You never know. You can continue to say.
So let me, I'm sorry to be talking so much, but So the problem with that is that PBOT wanted to change the Northwest parking plan and take the new supply out. They should have taken a resolution or a memo to council and tell us that this was off the table. And then we could have all gone down and fought with the decision makers and said yes or no, and then we would have gotten on with our lives.
Right.
Similarly, we were, as a committee, were very strongly in favor of requiring some off-street parking in the new construction in Northwest. Well, we took it to council. Council said no, they disagreed with us. We said, okay, fine. We've had our hearing. Now we can go on and work on some other thing. But to just have these changes made of such implications without even knowing they've been made until you read about it in a report that we were supposed to write, it doesn't work.
You spend a lot of time, a lot of money on a research study, where would this new parking supply come from? What, where's the need? What are ways that it could be funded? And you get that delivered, then only
And we
to.
had a couple of developers who were willing to take a try of it and do some of the subsidized.
Yeah, and only then to be kind of confronted with this realization that there's no way this is gonna, the way it's worded, there's no way that this is ever gonna happen. Yeah, like, can we cut to the chase and not waste time on things?
But it was not Rick Williams, his report didn't say that it had to be basically altered and adulterated by someone in PBOT to say this. He told me that was not in there. And that's pretty amazing.
Let's take it to like a higher level of our sort of or as an organization, how to we should function. And let's go to Joselle and hear a comment, and then as just a point of order, we need to allow for public comment, even though everybody's been talking. I think we need to officially say this is a public comment time, just to make cross the T's and dot the I's. So Joselle first, and then a quick public comment, and then we'll move on from there.
I don't mean to go down in the weeds, but I actually was the chair of the meeting that got closed down because we'd said we couldn't be doing it. What was ironic is the proposal was to actually put parking under the new park. So it was actually not engaging anything that would have taken away street parking or any other action. It wasn't a blank lot. So that was frustrating not to even be able to explore that. That's me.
Let's do a quick public comment, minute or two here, just to make sure we're behaving properly. So does anybody want to be recognized that's not a member of the parking committee?
I guess I could raise my hand. But
I'm
Yes. You, fellow.
All right, this I'm good. Amy?
Yeah, well, I think that's kind of the big thing, is if we don't, if time is more precious and we want to use meeting time and our energies as volunteers better, like how can we better understand and focus on things that we do have the opportunity to make a significant change. I would love be confronted with a problem where it's like, oh, we're gonna go to city council. Just go do it, and, instead of lots of studies and lots of around and around circular conversations.
Well, with all the new committee members, I think that this year's focus should be on how the systems works. How the on-street system works, what are the possibilities for changing things to make it work better, what have we done in the past? And do some education without necessarily thinking that come July or August of this year, you're gonna recommend changes to the system.
Mhm.
It's too soon, you need to work up to that.
Yeah,
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's kind of, you talked about a three-legged stool. And if the third leg has been removed, then it was basically, finding a way to, manage the on-street parking was, the big one. And then secondly, using, TDM measures to get people to drive less or own cars less. So how are those two things being done? What is the history of them? How did we get to, setting rates for parking, and is it the correct rate, or should we be, raising those rates or not? All of the things that are kind of the base and core of what created this group. I think maybe need to be revisited, and, at some point, it gets back to all the money that's being collected, and are we collecting enough money because we're not enforcing anymore? Or what are we gonna do with all this money? And maybe your idea of putting it in pots and saying, here's the criteria, here's the metric, come back and tell us how you spent that money and why it achieved what it was supposed to achieve. Boom, thank you.
Or can we spend more of our money on enforcement?
Steve has been quieter than I've ever seen him in my
Yeah.
life, Steve.
Been napping.
Something
No,
over.
I've been, listening, and I have a handful of comments that I just wanted to make, and they kind of go from specific to very, very broad, so I will make them now. The most exciting meeting we had last year was the one where with the proposal to raise the parking pass rates considerably, and that was beating on the drums that could be heard from a long ways away. We got plenty of new interested people out of that, but the idea of being able to use the rates to affect and influence behavior is completely held up in that, that moment. How much of an increase do you need to affect behavior, and how much of an increase is actually feasible? And so I think that was an interesting moment for many of us. Subcommittees, Rick, I think your notion of the subcommittees making the tasks easier or spreading them out a little bit further or just more manageable, I think is a terrific idea. The thing that I also observed, though, that subcommittees are advisory to the SAC as a whole, but there was this moment in which it was suggested that the subcommittees could actually take actions without taking it back to the SAC as a whole.
I don't think anybody ever suggested that, but.
No, but that actually came up during the course of.
I think there was some question about it.
And that seemed alarming.
It was definitely too much delegation, I would say. And then, we're like a fractious, contentious group. Everybody here has their own point of view, and everybody's sort of representing different ideas. And the problem with a subcommittee that's too powerful is that these group factions aren't properly aligned like the board is. If you can have two people that are really into we hate cars, and there's a 3-person group, then all of a sudden that committee is unbalanced. And if you look at the bylaws, there's a substantial amount of power, and they don't really have to go back to the board.
That seemed like an odd moment.
Yeah.
Potentially a very awkward.
And may I
situation.
just say, I kind of feel like, in a lot of ways, there's a lot of time spent, or there has been a lot of time spent down in the subcommittee level, where you come to the full group and you've just got to start over. I I'm sorry, it's a lot of time.
And I think that's a frustration that the staff feels too.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You know, it's the same thing, the subcommittee does a lot of work, gets something ready, presents it, and the discussion starts all over.
Yeah, I feel like.
The staff does a lot of work
better
on
with their time.
West Burnside or whatever, does a lot of outreach, comes to us, and they end up having to start all over again.
Some
That-
subcommittees.
That seems like something that could stand to be sorted out. I think fits in the broader context of the structure of the committee and its relationships with internally. Then the whole streetscape project was, of course, a favorite of mine, and I think the question as to whether that's really the SAC or the parking district scope is a good one. I think to me, that would be the number one candidate for offloading to the business district and the district association.
Isn't there some money to be had though, if it's still inside of the SAC? I mean,
No,
SAC's got money that can be
Tom,
spent.
I think the way you could do it is the SAC can approve up to $500,000 for street improvements.
Mhm.
Then somebody else can decide what those street improvements are going to be.
I get that.
And it just seems like one of those, an element where I would have hoped for the SAC to defer or refer that to the business district and the district association. You know, not
Yeah.
set free entirely, but, you know, taken out of the parking district.
I'm not
scope.
aware of what mechanisms there are
Yeah.
that you're describing there.
And it just seemed like an example.
Well,
of-
you know, it's
Well, I think if we were to fund a streetscape
Mhm.
program and establish an advisory committee for it that's NWDA members and Nob Hill members and whoever else, and set them free to then make those recommendations to the city,
Mhm.
that would empower them and
right, instead of
Oh, I
recommendations
see.
to the parking SAC, who
Yes,
then
right.
gets to go over it all over again.
Right.
And then you've just done 2 levels of process that may not need to.
That's elegant, because ultimately, yeah, you wanna gather input and give it to somebody who can do something with it. Then the question is, how does that get funded, you know, by the city to take further or?
Well, that's where the whole thing tends to fall apart,
Well, but
because,
what you were saying was that the SAC identifies pots of money, and, you know, there would be a pot of money for generally the streetscape-like activities, but then refers it to.
but
or
then has to go through the city
approve
process.
projects in the committee function.
Yeah.
That's-
Let me just skip through the rest of these and get back to it, but different from that, the budget approval process, I think it needs to be clarified entirely as to what our role is in that, because I think there were a lot of things that came up in the budget process this year that touched on things that were, you know, that needed some adjustment, attention, or otherwise. But it always seemed as though and, you know, when we started looking at the budget, it was already 2 months late.
Well,
So.
and they're operating without it, so clearly, we don't,
Right,
our
exactly.
approval of the budget.
And I'm not
doesn't-
sure that's the
doesn't
answer
do
either,
anything.
but I will say that it distinct from the streetscape, that is something that the SAC actually really, I mean, that's its primary scope amongst other things. And then finally, you know, as we talked initially in this meeting, you know, there's just, I mean, if this is a pause that refreshes, maybe we can shoot for a pause that resets. I don't know about refreshing, but resets. And the primary thing I'd like to see reset is just the tenor of the relationship between the staff and the members of the SAC. Because at least in my opinion, I think, you know, continued to get more contentious. And sometimes, a lot of times unnecessarily. But I think part of that had to do with what we were talking about before. It just moved away from being a group that was, you know, a deliberative body advising this PBOT as to how to allocate these funds in our neighborhood that we knew a lot about, to something else entirely. And I think about my frustration was in my view, I mean, PBOT acted an awful lot like all they wanted us to do was to say yes and thank you. You know, and I think in that reset, the times, I mean, the SAC needs to be able to challenge PBOT and for them to be comfortable. And I think I saw that just go completely out the window. I think PBOT was either uncomfortable, unequipped, or unable to deal with people going, I don't know, that doesn't sound quite right. I mean, that sounds like too much money, or that seems like a kind of step 4 before step 2. And, you know, a lot of the normal stuff that you would hope an advisory committee is gonna flush out, I guess. But at some point in time, it just seems like it completely shut down. It's, you know, we've got this agenda and we've got this calendar. And here we are, and we're moving through it, and, you know, you guys are welcome to come along, but if you don't, we're moving through it anyway.
I think there's a difference between like a stakeholder advisory committee and a stakeholder cheerleading committee, and, you know, they might want the latter.
Well, if you're on a committee, an advisory committee, and you're never gonna tell staff they're wrong, what's the point?
Well, I would say, take a
Well, that's what
look,
they'd like.
take another look at the letter that announced the pause coming. And if you see anything in there that suggests any self-reflection about how, on the part of PBOT, of how we got to that point, let me know. Because all I see in it is essentially, it's an accusation that this is the reason why we're doing this. Obviously, the funding is one thing, okay, but why they needed to do that and the information that was provided in that letter of why they had to do this timeout was essentially, you know, they don't have any responsibility in this. You know, they apparently PBOT did everything right and the SAC did everything wrong. And that's the reason why I had to stop. And I you know, I always, and Todd knows and Amy knows, when I talk to them about it, it's a narrative. I can't talk about individual points like everybody else does. It's just too difficult. But if you look at the narrative of this whole thing, from the beginning of why we were put together to the point where it all fell apart, you know, that's when you see what happened was the point of why we were created in the first place was usurped. It disappeared. And all we became is the rubber stamp that we're talking about. And if PBOT doesn't realize that even a little bit, good luck with a reset.
Much less a refresh.
Yes.
Anybody online wanna pipe in, and, I guess we'll have a couple quick last comments.
Yeah, and it's.
Vicky's new.
Vicky, would you like to introduce yourself or, add any comments to the group?
Oh,
You're on mute.
I just wanted to listen in. I haven't been very involved for a little while and I just thought I'd listen. And I mean, I've had some concerns about, you know, the way projects were decided upon and prioritized, and there didn't seem to be much community input. And there, oftentimes projects or community members weren't really notified in advance when something was happening on their street and things like that. So I'm just listening mostly.
Right, any last minute comments?
Let's do it again.
Yeah, what's like maybe for the good of the order, how do we feel about the meeting, and any suggestions on what can be done better, or how this should look moving forward?
Well, it'll be interesting. The city intends to start back again, the committee, in an official way on the 17th
That's right,
of April. What is that gonna look like?
I don't have the agenda yet.
Well,
I feel-
Yeah, we haven't,
So,
it's
one
premature.
final thought. The city is in such turmoil right now. PBOT has so many problems, and this is a small problem compared to the monetary problem. I think that things are not gonna change until the new council is in place and learns how to work. So I think the SAC over the next year should set a program for itself that's cooperative with PBOT that makes progress on things that are in your control.
Yeah, and just because the meetings resume doesn't mean everything will be totally ironed out. It's gonna be an organic.
And I'm kind of surprised about, this has a feeling of like, this meeting coming up, we're gonna sort of be scolded or something. I don't have any proof of that, but I just have the feeling that's how it's gonna go.
Is it gonna be an in-person?
I don't think we have
I don't think
details.
so.
I feel
would
like
be
I remember
surprised.
reading something about where it was going to be. And it sounded like it was an in-person meeting.
And if not, we can schedule a room where people can
So-
meet, hang out and
You don't-
participate together.
You've been talking to them and you don't know even if.
We have not, I know that part of the agenda on the 14th is gonna be talking about transition, like, what are we doing? Like, what's different or whatever.
Does Erica know if it's an in-person meeting?
I don't think it's an in-person meeting. I would be surprised. I haven't heard
So,
that.
we did not plan it to be an in-person meeting. However, let's think about that. So we'll talk to Amy about whether folks want that, whether we can make it a hybrid meeting, because I think it would be probably good, or refresh, however we want to call it, to meet in person. My personal preference is always to meet in person. So, I'll talk to Amy about that.
Yep.
Thank you.
My preference would be as well.
Thanks, Erica.
Great.
Erica, may I ask, will we be able to, will the recommendations going forward be distributed to the SAC in advance of the meeting?
That is our aim. We were, in all transparency, we anticipated being done with the recommendations a couple of weeks back to give the director enough time to review and provide feedback, within her busy schedule. The recommendations aren't getting to her until, we believe, tomorrow. So she's gonna have to have a moment to be able to sit with it. But that is still my aim, and that's what I'm pushing for. And even if the whole package doesn't come at the same time, our aim is still to start conversation at that April meeting. And Todd, just real quick, my intention is not to scold the SAC.
Yeah.
So
Erica, may I ask
Yeah.
what the whole package consists of?
Let's let them finalize it before we try to.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I know this is it's a bit of an awkward situation because, I have a boss and I need to have my boss vet things before I can really talk about it. But we have three sort of general areas: SAC administration, cost recovery, that kind of thing. Some of the things that were outlined in that letter are overarching goals. But yeah, more to come. And I am sorry that we haven't been able to share that sooner. Yeah, I know this is a bit of an awkward position, but I do appreciate you guys letting me sit in and yeah, listen to what you guys have to say. And we do have to talk about the agenda with my staff and with Amy, but it is also our intent, while we're going through this, it's, struck us, obviously, like, if we want you guys to listen to us, it's a two-way street and we need to listen to you too. So that's part of our intention for the first meeting as well.
Great.
Thanks, Erica.
Just thought I'd quickly point out, so the project at 24th and Vaughn is in place. If you haven't been by or through there yet, went in over the last couple days, I think, or maybe over the weekend. And a quick reminder, that is something that was supported by the SAC and I believe Northwest neighborhood to control through traffic on 24th. So as you're bopping around on foot, on bike, on skateboard, in your car, and are traveling through that intersection and the 23rd and Vaughn and 405 intersection, be thinking about what you see and what your experience is, and if it changes at all as a result of the inability to turn left off of Vaughn anymore onto 24th.
That's great. Well, I think we're at time for the meeting. Are we? Any
I think
last
we're
comments
done.
before we go? Yep. Well, thank you for attending the first
Whatever it's called.
SAC meeting, you know, that we're calling from our
I
side.
worked on this year.
Good thing.
Yeah, I would personally like to do one of these.
And thanks to you all, the old timers. Yes, yes, well, you'll see when you get to these. Back in your day.
Thanks, everybody.
Back in 1776.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What was this three words in the Constitution again? We, the people. So,